On the 18th of October, 2023, Wab Kinew officially became the first person of First Nations descent to become the Premier of Manitoba, Canada. His swearing-in ceremony marked the latest turn in an incredible life journey that has led to a history-making feat for the man from the biggest of Canada's 3 Indigenous groups. On that day, Kinew cemented his place in Canada's Indigenous peoples' folklore and began the next chapter in his eventful life story. Wab Kinew's life has been an impressive journey that has taken him from the classrooms to the broadcast rooms and the corridors of power. Throughout this journey, the Ontario-born man of First Nation ancestry was never shy to acknowledge his Indigenous roots. Whether during his time as a radio host at CBC Radio or as the Associate Vice President for Indigenous Relations at the University of Winnipeg, Kinew always stood up for the rights of his people. So when he indicated his interest in running on the platform of the Manitoba New Democratic Party for a seat in the provincial legislature, it didn't come as a surprise to people who knew him. He went on to make history from that time, starting as the first of his kind to lead a political party in Manitoba, and then the first First Nations indigene to become Manitoba's Premier. Kinew's victory marked the culmination of a life's work of advocacy, commitment, and personal development. His history-making feat promises to be the latest in what many people feel will be a life of many other firsts and even bigger history-making feats for this man from such humble beginnings. This is the incredible story of Wab Kinew, who made history after becoming the first person of First Nations heritage to become Premier of Manitoba. As we take you on this journey, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on your notification bell. Wab Kinew is the Ontario-born 25th Premier of Manitoba, Canada, and the first Premier of First Nations descent. His impressive rise to the top of Manitoba's provincial politics and government is an incredible story of grit, grace, and commitment. Kinew's life has seen him overcome personal struggles and various obstacles on his way to making history. In becoming the first man from the First Nations Indigenous group of Canada to lead the Manitoba province, Wab Kinew has successfully paved the way for more Indigenous representation in Canada's public offices. While his family background and upbringing set him up for his life's true work and journey, Kinew charted his course and carved out a career that cut across different lines. He delved into broadcasting, university administration, and rap music, and authored a few books before venturing into politics, where he has since achieved wide acclaim. To understand and appreciate his incredible journey, it is important to look at his family background and rich ancestral roots. Wab Kinew's father is an Anishinaabe chief from Onigaming First Nations in Ontario, Manitoba. The First Nations people, along with the Inuits and the Métis people, make up Canada's 3 Aboriginal or Indigenous groups. Today, Canada has over 630 First Nations communities. While Wab Kinew was the first First Nations person to become Manitoba Premier, he was not the first Indigenous person to do so. That title belongs to John Norquet from the Métis group, an impressive feat he achieved as far back as 1878. Similarly, the Manitoba legislature in 2019 passed a bill that ratified Louis Riel from Métis as Manitoba's first Indigenous Premier. This is after the Métis leader presided over the Assiniboia Legislative Assembly in what was a precursor to the Premier of modern-day Manitoba. In the rest of this video, we'll explore 8 highlights of Wab Kinew's journey to becoming Manitoba's Premier. These highlights provide relevant context to help appreciate his journey and experience as a First Nation Indigenous person and Manitoba's 2050 Premier. Wab Kinew's origins can be traced to the rich tapestry of the Anishinaabe culture of the Indigenous First Nation people. He is a son of ancient Canadian soil, and his roots are firmly entrenched in the Onigaming traditional way of life and heritage. Wab Kinew was born in 1981 in Kenora, Ontario, to a regional chief and professor father and a policy analyst mother. And while he didn't spend much of his growing up in his ancestral home, he still maintains close ties to the people and their practices. Whether it is the Sweat Lodge, the Sun Dance, or other native practices, Kinew observed and continues to keep many native practices that are key to understanding and appreciating his journey as the first Premier of First Nation origin. As one of Canada's 3 Indigenous or Aboriginal groups, the others being the Inuits and Métis, Kinew's First Nation heritage is perhaps the most important and impressive detail in his profile. Wab Kinew has achieved something incredible that represents a watershed event in the history of Canada's Indigenous people's journey. His success is remarkable and historic. It is a perfect testament to the resilience and industry of the First Nation people and Canada's Indigenous people. Kinew was born to well-educated parents, so it is no surprise that he would be very well invested in several educational pursuits in his journey to becoming Premier. His father, Toba Sonakwut Kinew, taught at the University of Winnipeg as a professor of Indigenous governance, while his equally learned mother worked as a policy analyst. He began his education at Collège Béliveau, a French immersion school, and proceeded to the University of Winnipeg Collegiate, where he finished high school. Kinew would later graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of Manitoba, and then earn a Master's in Indigenous governance. He later traced his father's path by serving as the first Director of Indigenous Inclusion at the University of Winnipeg, and in 2014 he was made the Associate Vice President of Indigenous Relations at the same university. In essence, Wab Kinew prepared extensively for his future political commitments by grounding himself in the subject of Indigenous relations. He acquired critical knowledge on the subject, and has even published a few books that explore the Indigenous people's story and living reality. Wab Kinew cut his teeth in media and advocacy before making his mark in politics. He started as a broadcaster after being contacted by CBC Radio to create a documentary on the subject of Team Canada. This was after his letter to the Winnipeg Free Press editor on the subject was published. He would later work for CBC Radio as a reporter and host for its radio and television operations. Kinew's broadcasting credits and highlights include appearances in various documentary series and art magazines, and as a panelist for the Canada Reads competition, which he won and later moderated. He also used his time in radio to pursue advocacy for and discuss issues affecting Indigenous people. An example is his national documentary series, 8 Fire, with CBC, where he continually explored the challenges faced by the Indigenous First Nations people in the past and present. He was always keen to lend his voice to issues related to the Indigenous Canadian people, and his next stop after broadcasting did not trace a different path. Wab Kinew also ventured into music during his journey. He was most notably a member of the hip-hop groups Slang Blossom and the Dead Indians in the mid-2000s. In 2009, his debut individual CD as a rapper earned him the Aboriginal People's Choice Music Award. His next stop after the music was university administration, when the University of Manitoba made him their first ever Director of Indigenous Inclusion in 2011. Throughout his career, Kinew always made a point of exploring the lives and work of Indigenous peoples and bringing their stories to light. His voice on air helped to amplify their peculiar problems, and his actions promoted their cause whenever he could. All of this helped to prepare him for his political career, where he would get the chance to make a much more significant impact. Wab Kinew's road to Premier was not always smooth and straightforward, It was pretty eventful and marked by a few run-ins with the law and an alcohol problem that he has since put behind him. Kinew's various run-ins include driving under the influence charges, fights with taxi drivers, and even his then-girlfriend. Wab Kinew documented some of these issues in his books, and later talked about how he was given a second chance at life to pursue a political career. He tackled his alcohol problem with intent and purpose, and explored various avenues to put this problem behind him. Wab Kinew attended anonymous meetings, sweat lodges, and even fasted for 4 days as part of a Sundance ritual to tackle this problem. He would later have his convictions removed from the Canada Police Information Centre. After successfully applying for parole from the Parole Board of Canada in 2016, Wab Kinew's struggles and triumphs over alcoholism are an enduring reminder of the strength of character that has served him ever so well throughout his life. His various brushes with law enforcement and commitment to rehabilitation are important to telling the story of his come-up. Since then, he has put his ugly past behind him and charted a more fulfilling course in advocacy and public office. Wab Kinew made the transition from advocacy and private work life to public office and politics in 2016, with his successful bid for a place in the Manitoba provincial legislature. Manitoba began a journey that would see him create history as the first Canadian Premier of First Nations ancestry. Much earlier in his political career, he had considered and then dropped his intent to hold public office in 2014 because of his new marriage. Wab Kinew would later make his mark in the 2016 elections for the Manitoba province, which he contested and won under the Manitoba New Democratic Party. His time in the Manitoba legislature saw him shape key provincial policies that positively impacted the lives of people in Manitoba. His next big step in his historic political journey was becoming the leader of the Manitoba New Democratic Party in 2017. This was a major milestone as he became the first Indigenous person to lead a party in the Manitoba province. It paved the way for his eventual rise to Premier in Manitoba and helped him make an even bigger impact on issues affecting Indigenous people. Kinew climbed to the pinnacle of his political career when he was sworn in as Premier of Manitoba in October 18, 2023. Advocacy for the rights of Canada's Indigenous peoples has been a recurring theme of Kinew's life. Being an Indigenous Canadian himself, he has used every position and office he ever occupied to promote better welfare for and understanding of his people's unique challenges. During his time in broadcasting, Kinew hosted several shows and documentaries that beamed the spotlight on Indigenous people and their reality. His documentary series, 8 Fire, explored the lives of Indigenous peoples, and he has written several books that followed this path. Wab Kinew even served as a director of Indigenous inclusion at the University of Winnipeg, a first for anyone of First Nations descent. Kinew's political journey saw him make even further strides in bringing Indigenous people's stories to light. Kinew was the first of his kind to lead a political party, the New Democratic Party. He used his office to bridge the gap between Canada's Indigenous peoples and the rest of Canada. Kinew paved the way for more Indigenous peoples' representation in Canada's local politics, and even up to the big stage. His desire for community development and his work in curating reconciliation programs to integrate Indigenous people with Canada's mainstream is one of the biggest highlights of his early political career. While Kinew's bid for Premier of Manitoba saw him adopt a broader outlook, he still preached inclusivity and understanding every other day. And after making history as the first First Nations Indigene to occupy the Manitoba Premier office, he vowed not to stray from the path he had walked for so long. Now that Wab Kinew has become the Premier of Manitoba, the real work has begun, as he has previously acknowledged. Thankfully, Kinew has the leadership experience to draw from and even bigger prospects to look forward to. His electioneering campaign drew enthusiasm from his supporters, desiring a fresh breath of air. Kinew rode on the wave of a keen promise to improve Manitoba's healthcare system and education sector. He also spoke about tackling the province's chronic deficits and improving the welfare of workers in the public sector. His promises covered subjects like healthcare for seniors, northern and rural communities, and international students during a campaign that seemed to focus on healthcare. He also promised to impact the areas of safety and crime prevention, highway infrastructure and surveillance, STEM programming in high schools, and other crucial sectors affecting people all over Manitoba. The next subject in his eventful journey will be how he will manage the build-up of expectations from his inspiring campaign and fulfill his promises. Many of his admirers and other observers say he is well on the path to meeting his people's collective goals. And if we have learned anything from Wab Kinew's story so far, it is that he is a man who commits to a cause and pursues it with immense zeal and zest. Kinew's new office also allows him to make an even further impact on the lives of Canada's Indigenous peoples. He has the platform to amplify their unique challenges now more than ever, and he has previously shown that he can make a real impact from the inside when given the floor. Heather Stevenson, the Premier whom Kinew succeeded in office, was most notably let down by her failure to fulfill her promise to the Indigenous community in Manitoba. She had promised to work closely with the Indigenous people during her time as Premier. But when she shunned calls to investigate the deaths of 2 First Nations women in Manitoba, the pressure against her rose to a climax. The 2 women were suspected to have been murdered by a serial killer who dumped their bodies in the Prairie Green landfill. Stevenson rejected calls to order a search, citing the huge hazards and capacity constraints involved in carrying out a search effort. She would later be told to resign by the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, who were angry with her decision. Wab Kinew made revisiting the case a crucial part of his electioneering campaign, and while a federal feasibility study said it would take 3 years and about $180 to prosecute the search, Wab Kinew promised to launch the search in 2024. He promised to investigate the deaths of the 2 women and to ensure that it never gets to happen again. While certain critics of Kinew's promise say it was merely a grand gesture to solicit the support of Indigenous voters, Kinew has doubled down on his promise several times. This situation stands out as a recurring theme throughout Kinew's journey, where he has always looked out for issues affecting Canada's Indigenous people. These 8 highlights represent some of the most important events and most prominent themes in the life of Wab Kinew on his way to becoming Premier. It is a summary of Kinew's most easily recalled living experiences and his reality as an Indigenous person in Canada. Wab Kinew's rise from an Indigenous person navigating Canada's complex socio-political and cultural terrain to becoming Manitoba's Premier is an impressive story of resilience, commitment, and providence. He survived several difficult periods in his life and overcame every type of adversity he faced on his way to making history. His story inspires people from all walks of life to pursue their dreams and goals, and not be limited by their background and their past. This is where we draw the curtains on yet another exciting and informative episode. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. Kindly help us share this video, subscribe and turn on your notification bell. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time.